Here's an excerpt from the Suvoda webinar, Navigating the Next Wave of Innovation in eCOA, recorded on November 20th, 2024. You can listen to the full webinar at suvoda.com.
We have a great panel today. Andres Escallon, who is the Vice President of eCOA Solution Strategy for Suvoda. Dr. Jill Platko, who is Vice President of Scientific Services at Suvoda. And Ian Jennings, Executive Vice President of eCOA Enterprise Sales for Suvoda.
Or the paradigm that needs to sit underneath everything that you just said is really about simplification. And I think people or sponsors, be it the medical writers, be it the folks that are coming up and designing these trials, simplicity is not something that we tend to talk about very much in clinical research. We tend to say that technology has enabled complexity, and we are now having and seeing more and more and more complex trials. But the perspective that we need to take as far as being as solution providers to really introduce the right solution is really about reducing steps. It's about simplifying what we need to do. It's being practical about how you solve a problem. And Jill, you mentioned a lot about the hype of new technology and do we need to fit it in, or how can we get or leverage a lot of this tech? But we have advanced quite a bit in the last 10 years, really, and that hype has also come with a lot of assumption, I would say. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, definitely a lot of assumption. Our slide says innovation, and Ian, you're talking about doing things differently, and we've mentioned hype. And one of the things that you're seeing a lot about right now, a lot of discussion about, a lot of webinar topics, a lot of presentations at conferences, is wearables. And maybe this is kind of the evolution of where data collection might be going. It might be the next step. Definitely something technologically based. And it's all about these passive forms of data collection. And it's definitely an emerging field, and it's really interesting. But one of the things I find kind of most intriguing and interesting is that the basics still apply here. The assessment still has to be fit for purpose, just like any other COA. It still has to be proven to support the trial endpoint, just like any COA. The endpoint still has to be relevant to the patients, just like any other COA. What I keep hearing is the realization that these wearables aren't going to replace questionnaires. They're not going to replace diaries. That these are going to be two complementary sources of information. That the questionnaires are needed, that the diaries are needed to understand where, what the information coming from the wearables really means. So that these future pieces, the next stages of data collection still needs all of those best practices, all of those processes, all of that collaboration, all of the things that are needed now for the next steps. All of that new technology needs all of these basic solutions that we need now.
And it's not just about the solutions. It really is about and you mentioned like the basics, right? It's about the sound process behind some of these things. And really anytime that we talk about, we talk introducing this new questionnaire or this new thing, we get, appropriately questions from sponsors like, what's your process around that? And like, how are you doing this? Because, in many ways, a lot of these newer things are either unproven. We don't really see the data out there for what the quote unquote best practice is for applying those things. And so we do have to rely on our foundational knowledge and like the things that we set out to build to ensure that this technology did what it was supposed to and can take advantage of all of these other, growing other technologies. But when we look at eCOA as a tool, it's to me, it's something that we need to expand as far as like the kind of data that we're capturing. So you mentioned passive data collection through wearables. We're talking about new different kinds of assessments and say different kinds of batteries of assessments. I mean, we're seeing more and more trials with, you know, increasing the amount of eCOA that is being gathered. But really, I think it's about how those data pieces are connected and the story that they do tell. And so we can kind of adapt that to sort of the growing complexity in trials, but quite frankly, it brings it back to what Ian was saying. When this industry first got started, the technology was a rate limiting step, and so we had to build sound process around that. That hasn't changed. That none of that has really gone away, or I mean, it's been improved over time, obviously, but what it really what I think it does as far as taking eCOA or helping eCOA, you know, fulfill its mission, but also take the next step in the coming years. It's about how that process helps to break down some of the complications and some of the barriers that we've created. I mean, we've evolved as an industry over the last few years, and quite frankly, I think a lot of process or a lot of steps have been created as a result of the challenges that we've faced. And is that really necessary? Are we overcomplicating things because there is either not enough data to show that, or trust perhaps? So really trying to address that point about trusting the right people and the right vendors to execute or to try and listen to the things that the expertise that is being shared. I mean, we're clearly speaking from a point of passion here, but at the same time, I really do think that when looking at those processes, we have to be practical and we need to be simple about those things. You know, just because you need to ensure that a process is robust and it's covering all the different steps, it addresses every edge case, you can still lose sight of what you're trying to do and the purpose of what you're trying to do. So we've encouraged that at Suvoda. Suvoda is very process heavy and very focused on quality. You know, that is paramount. But truly, I think it's about making sure that those processes are helping us to break down some of the challenges, break down barriers, not introduce a lot of complexity, because ultimately all of this gets passed down to whatever the site's user experience is, whatever the participants' user experience is, and ultimately how our sponsors are running these studies. So for me, it really is around a process that breaks down those barriers, trust that is engendered as a result of that, and really challenging some of our old conception, which is, you know, the trusted paper process. And so what are we really trying to do here? Are we really trying to attack the tried and true way, I say that sarcastically, of collecting eCOA when there's so many options of technology out there? I don't know. And when we hear that from sponsors, like, what's your paper process? I mean, to me, it kind of, you know, I almost have an allergic reaction to it. It's, yeah, I get it. We need to have it, but why? And are you really looking at the benefit that the technology can bring? Double down on that. Like, this is what we're really trying to accomplish. But I'm curious, Jill, about your take, really about how we need to really be applying these solutions, but especially from your perspective, given your view from and experience on the research side.
Well, you talked about, you know, tried and true ways. You talked about not enough data. You talked about paper backup. So I want data. I want to be able to face a sponsor who says, I need paper backup, and say, well, do you really? Because our data shows that you only actually lost potentially X amount of data. And here's the data that shows that. So what I really want to be able to do is to have the evidence to support everything that we say, everything that we propose related to a design. You know, those tried and true ways, I want data that supports that. And you said that sarcastically, tried and true ways, but there are best practices, and there's
Yes.
not a lot of data supporting those best practices. You know, we
Mm-hmm.
say this should be an evening diary. I want to say this should be an evening diary because we know there's better compliance with evening diaries. And in fact, we do know there's better compliance with evening diaries because I have done that research. Unfortunately, it's at another vendor and they didn't publish that, so it's only anecdotal. I want to do that research again
Mhm.
so that we can support that, so we can show that. Yeah, that's really what I want to be able to do.
Ian, what do you think?
Look, I mean, I agree, obviously. I mean, I agree with you both on this, but we're coming at it from slightly different angles. I suppose my point is, if we identify what the problems are and we can address them, then what happens? You know, if we can say, you know, Jill is quite right. You know, the whole point of doing a clinical trial is it's a science experiment. We've got control groups. We're trying to prove efficacy. We're trying to advance healthcare by introducing new therapies, new medicines, and we need to know they work and need to know they're safe. You know, so that's the objective. So I suppose we sometimes get into the weeds a little bit of this, and I always try and pull myself out of that, because then we're losing sight of the whole objective. I mean, for me, if we could, you know, address some of the challenges that we are facing and still provide high high degree of science input and get high quality data, then eCOA then will have fulfilled its potential and the objectives, that the whole reason, you know, that it was a concept that was invented in the first place was we're making decisions here on data points that have been recorded by patients on how they feel when they can't remember, and that was the essence of it all. So therefore, that medicine is going to be deemed to be efficacious. It's deemed to be a success versus, you know, current treatments, and you know, we're gonna go with it. But we don't really know. Now that's primary endpoint stuff. I agree, but whether it's primary endpoint or secondary or exploratory or, you know, or surrogate even, or whatever, the whole point is collecting high quality data that has got high integrity, so you absolutely know. And it might be that there are some missing data points. And of course, you know, from a data management perspective, that is, you know, the thing you're trying to avoid the most. But I would rather have data which I can rely on, that is high quality, that I can trust with gaps, than a full data set where I'm got a couple of questions about whether or not that was valid or not. So I think the overall thing for me on all this, I'm just trying to come back to it, is if we can remember what it's doing, it's a real strong benefit, and as a knock-on effect, you know, downstream in terms of very, very expensive decisions that sponsors are making in terms of moving forward with drugs that are in evaluation. I just think that, you know, if we can improve the perception of eCOA by executing on the promises that we have just discussed over the last sort of half an hour or so, and some of the ideas for things that we can do better. And I totally accept that there are, as technology evolves, there's fantastic ways to collect more holistic data, more three-dimensional data, supporting data. And to Jill's point around wearables and passive data collection, it opens up a huge avenue in terms of being able to really slice and dice data in a different way, and be able to get more meaning out of it. But we've got to do that within the concept of trusted delivery. And I would prefer that we would start with building that trust back in the core technology that we have, and start to introduce new technology on a stronger platform, because what we're having right now is that lack of trust that we talked about that's been eroded, and now we're introducing new things on top, which is causing us to have a little bit of a kind of hiatus in terms of the belief and faith in what it is we're trying to do. So back to everything we said before, I think clinical research benefits, you know, with better science, you know, and we'll get better outcomes if we can just take what we have right now and make it something that everyone can trust and rely upon.
You just listened to an excerpt from the Suvoda webinar, Navigating the Next Wave of Innovation in eCOA, recorded on November 20th, 2024. You can listen to the full webinar at suvoda.com.